Disempowerment within video games is the deprivation of resources, strength, and abilities. This is one of the driving factors in all great horror games, as feeling weak and powerless is the key to putting players in a frightening situation. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard executes this brilliantly in many ways, however, I will be focusing on level design, lighting, and balance. Scott Rogers defines level design as the breakup of space based on specific gameplay experience. For a vulnerable experience, Biohazard confines players to extremely cramped and claustrophobic conditions, much like the first Resident Evil's narrow corridors, which puts players in an uncomfortable position as maneuvering past enemies is very difficult. Restricting the player to these close encounters is effective disempowerment, because the player must either frantically waste bullets or retreat, instilling fears of being trapped. The basement of the guest house takes away the latter option of retreating, as the only known exit, the ladder, is broken, so the player must move deeper into the basement. Closed doors and locked areas are very simple concepts in level design, though the tension created by them is very effective. Hiding information from the player in this way creates anticipation. Players realize they must open every door, then have to face any monsters and enemies that may be waiting for them on the other side. This type of disempowerment is interesting because it forces players to enter new areas with caution and dread, defined as fearful expectation. This suspense is taken further with some doors that have a delay in unlocking, which can slow down players in an escape or build the anticipation of moving into unknown territories. While players are trapped in the spaces they're given, enemies not only have free roam, but are able to break through those parameters. This gives enemies the ability to block off escape routes, take shortcuts, and destroy obstacles to make it more difficult to evade enemy attacks. Empowering the enemy with control of the map widens the gap between them and the player, who is even more restrained and suspicious of their environment. Layers of fear also alters the structure of the map, weakening their perceptions to feel the insanity of the main character. Lighting refers to the positioning of light sources, their intensities, movement, and use of shadows. Biohazard's first-person perspective uses a flashlight view which obscures peripheral vision, removing the ability to react quickly to threats from either side. This is accompanied by high-intensity spotlights. Dead Space's Ian Millam describes these as the uncomfortable feeling you get from a dentist office because it stirs up notions of interrogation and panic as the light blinds players to the heavily contrasted darkness behind the source. Rather than behind the blinding light, threats in the foreground are even more so panic-inducing due to the very clever silhouette effect used in 28 Days Later, where the number of enemies is uncertain. Players are unable to distinguish between shadows and silhouettes, and movement of multiple enemies creates the illusion of a more powerful whole, especially since depth perception is reduced to flat dark shapes. Sensory deprivation causes players to become anxious of their surroundings and deliriously make mistakes, creating an exciting sense of fear. Balancing is the manipulation of rewarding and crippling game elements, for example, resources such as consumables, weapons, keys. Previous Resident Evil games shower players with an abundance of weapons, ammunition, and health, while Biohazard provides very little resources, making each enemy encounter more frightening as they must ration. Even when more items are granted, players are disempowered because of their increasing demand. When health is increased and medicine is more common, enemies become stronger. When ammunition is more common, enemy encounters become more frequent. Takeuchi explains that even though enemies become less frightening as weapons get stronger, ammunition is always limited, and when the items you depend on are finally depleted, the fear doubles instantly. Agency is the player's control of in-game events. Balancing agency is very difficult since full agency gives the player too much power, but little agency can be frustrating. Tanya Kravinska writes that removing agency makes players feel weak. Biohazard accomplishes this without being frustrating by allowing things like free roam and avoiding enemies at times, motivating with some agency. However, in the first fight against Mia, players are taught to block and be able to defend themselves, only to get stabbed, thrown through a wall, and lose a hand. In this case, players believe they have power, then that control is taken away by carrying on the gruesome event believed to be avoidable. Cases like this further disempower players, as they are unaware agency is taken away, lacking the information to predict these situations. Effective horror games cleverly balance how much information is given to the player. Revealing too much would lead to a much less scary game, as the player is empowered by knowledge, but revealing too little could cause confusion and demotivation. In the guest house, players are given a tape that reveals the secret entrance to the basement, in which the cameraman finds a dead body, a person approaching, followed by screams. However, information of the rest of the basement, if the person was an enemy, if they're still down there, how to escape, and much more is left a mystery. Without knowing what to expect, players are unprepared for the haunting place they're about to enter. In the main house, it's shown that monsters can emerge from black mold, and enemies can break through walls, but it's uncertain which mold and which walls will be the next horrific encounter, creating that chilling feeling of not knowing when you would be attacked, Takeuchi describes. Biohazard plants clues and ideas to motivate players, then disempowers them with unpredictability and insecurity by hiding information. To conclude, weakening the player comes in many forms, trapping them in tight spaces, obscuring and tricking their vision, depriving them of vital resources and information, but they all contribute to the main goal of horror games, being afraid. In the face of danger, a disempowered player is a terrified one.